Good morning or afternoon, lovely humans. So today we're going to be working through section C.1.2 in Appendix C from your textbook. The problems that we'll be going over are C20 to C23. So today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into histograms and box plots and how we can interpret them specifically. So if you haven't already, please take a moment to read aloud C-20. All right, so the key thing about this problem is that you want to think like a business person. All right, so you are trying to make money. You want to get your fruit to the farmer's market, and the farmer's market is only accepting fruit that is above average, but they don't actually tell you what they mean by average, and that's where you want to be a little bit clever. So, if you want more fruit that's above average, the first question to think about is, do you want a lower average or a higher average? So let's think about that for a moment. If you have a higher average, that means that the fruits that fall above said average is going to be less, right? So it turns out one of the key things about this problem is that we want the average to be low. All right, that's really important for understanding the problem. So some things to think about when we're looking at this. So the first part A, we're looking at some fruit, and the things to think about are which is going to be lower, the mean or the median. How is that going to affect the median and the mean? And that's pretty much what we want to look at, right? So it turns out the outlier, if the outlier is really low, right, then that's actually going to bring down the mean a lot more. So looking at kind of a simple example, let's say we have the numbers 1, 10, 12, and 14. So looking at the median is going to be 11. And the mean is going to be 1 plus 10 is 11, plus 12 is 23, 37. So adding it all up, we get 37. We're going to divide by the 4 values, and we're going to get 9.25. So notice how this low value, this outlier, drags the average down when we calculate it using the mean. And so I know that's kind of a random example, but it does do a good job of showing why, in the case of part A, we're going to want to use the mean. And I will let you explain why. And then we are now looking at part B. So take a moment to read it if you haven't already. So what does it mean that we don't have a right whisker, right? We're dealing with this weird thing here where there's literally, like, it has a whisker over here and then there's nothing over here. What that means is that our Q3 is the same as what value? It's going to be the same as the maximum value, which can only mean one thing, that all of the numbers in that last quartile, in the upper 25%, must be the same number. How else are we going to have the middle and the max be the same unless they're all the exact same number? So most of the data then, and you can tell here, most of our data, that's like the first part of the question. What does it mean? It means that the top part of the data, it's all the same. So we also want to figure out, once again, are we using the mean or the median for our benefit here as business owners? So if you look at the data here, most of our data is high. So most data points are in the high range, which means that if we take our median, so if we have a bunch of numbers and the majority of them are high numbers, that means that our median is also going to be a high number. So do we want the median? No, we want to have a low value. So the low value that we're looking for, once again, is going to fall to the mean. So hopefully, so for part B, you should have already written some sort of explanation about the missing right whisker. The main idea about part B is that we'd use the mean once again, because, and then you should mention something about the skew of the data and kind of what we just talked about. So part C, is anyone going to be a little bit mad about the way that we're presenting our data? Yeah, it's a little deceptive, right? So why is it deceptive? I want you to think about that. And there's lots of different ways you can say this, but the main thing is it's not doing a very good job of describing our typical fruit weight. And that's the goal of the center, or of like an average, is that you want to describe the typical fruit. And this, in this case, the mean is a little bit low, which is great for us, but also a little bit deceptive to the people that we're talking to. So put that in your own words. Alrighty. Part D. So when is the mean going to be more helpful for describing that typical value, and when is the median going to be better for that? So it may help to think about all the things that we just talked about, right? So like here, we used the mean for our own benefit, right? Because it didn't actually do a very good job. And one of the main reasons it didn't do a very good job at describing our typical fruit was because it had an outlier, all right? So if we're gonna use the mean and we want it to actually represent a typical fruit or a typical piece of data, then we wouldn't want to have outliers. And what we learned from part B, once again, we used the mean, but it didn't do a very good job of representing the data because it was skewed. Most of the values were higher, right? So if we're going to use the mean and we want it to actually be like a good representation, no outliers and not skewed. Another word that we use to say not like most of the values are up or are higher or lower, we would say that it is symmetrical. Right, because that way when we're looking at our data, rather than looking like something like that, where it's like, wow, a lot of the data is really high, we would look at something symmetrical and it would look more like a nice little like step thingy going on. All right, so that wraps up C-20. I will see you pause to try number 21. Read through it, try it on your own, and come back when you're ready. Okie dokie, so now that you've had a chance to try it for yourself, up here I've kind of put like a step-by-step for Fancyville and Smallville's data. So first you want to put your numbers in order because that's really the only way that you're going to be able to find your median. So you want to put the numbers in order, least to greatest. I like to do that in a widely spaced list, kind of like that. That way, if I miss a number by accident, it's easy to fill in. So once you put them in order, you should actually get the same median for both, right? So the median for both of them is going to be the same value. In Smallville, you can actually count. It's the fourth data point, 275. And in Fancyville, it's the value between 270 and 280. Once again, 275. To get the mean, you want to add up all the numbers. And this is where using not your phone calculator is going to be good. So what I used was Google. If you don't have your calculator handy, you can just type in all your values, like 150 plus blah, 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 and then divide it by your number of numbers, right? So in the case of Fancyville, it was 14. And then in the case of Smallville, 247 plus blah, 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 divided by 7. And then, so for Fancyville and Smallville, the mean was 275. And then the mean for Fancyville was 506,786, give or take. And the mean for Smallville was 274. So super big difference, right? So the median was about the same in both cases. Whereas the mean, because of those super extra expensive houses in Fancyville, the mean was much higher in Fancyville, even though their medians were about the same. Interesting. Okie doke. C-22, I will have you once again, please read it on your own. Go ahead and pause right now. So now that you've read about Cyrus and Ramian, hopefully you're kind of thinking like, why would they want to compare that data? And like, how would they even compare it? It doesn't really make sense. Because first of all, there's no way one is going to affect the other. Second of all, they don't even have the same number of data points. So you'd have like 7 X's and 14 Y's, which would be super weird. And there's just not a relationship, right? There's no relationship that you're trying to study. So does not make sense. They're in completely different realms. Just no. So you can put that in your own words. All right. So C-23 asks you to learn how to use your graphing calculator. So I did post a great tutorial in modules since I could not figure out a way to like make my own video. And also they did a pretty good job explaining it. So you're going to learn how to make a histogram on your calculator. The one thing I would say is that when you are done making said histogram, please make sure that you turn your stat plot off if you want to use it again for not stat things. So that's a big problem at the beginning of the year. A lot of people's calculators were in stat mode and you're like, why isn't it graphing things? Because once you're done with histograms and everything, you want to go to stat plot and turn it off in the same way that you turned it on in the tutorial. So, and there's lots of things that you are going to notice about the data from your histogram and box plot. And so you can kind of mess around with that and email me if you have any other questions. I guess one weird thing is, so in a modified box plot, and someone asked me about this in a conference the other day. I believe it was Mark. Thank you, Mark. So the modified box plot is the one that excludes the outliers, right? So if you have like data, and rather than having like an insanely long whisker, just because there's like one data point way the heck out here, a modified box plot is going to take any big outliers and put like a little X or a little star or something, just to show that that point is like such an outlier that it probably doesn't even need to be considered in our whiskers. And that's all for today. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your night, rest of your morning, and I'll see you next time.